director of the Toronto Motorcycle Film Festival. And tonight we are speaking with Ned Thanhouser, who's the director of one of the short films that we're screening at this year's festival called Ray Tauscher, America's Forgotten World Champion Motorcycle Racer. So Ned Thanhouser is familiar to some of you who follow TMFF. He had one of his films, The Monkey and Her Driver, screening at our inaugural festival in 2017. And we had the pleasure of having Ned and his wife, Michelle, join us all the way from Portland. Took a leap of faith and came and visited us in Toronto. And that was wonderful. And we've been in contact ever since. Ned's produced a number of films since then and even before then. And this film, Ray Tauscher, is really interesting. It is a documentary about a forgotten motorcycle racer. And what struck me about the film, not only in the way that it was presented, but looking back, the amount of research that Ned must have went through in order to put it together is incredible. So I wanted to talk to Ned a little bit about that and get some of that backstory. So without further ado, let's bring on Ned.
Greetings.
Ned, how are you?
Yes, nice to see you again. Thank you so much for having me.
It is wonderful to see you again as well. And I hope we can get to see each other in person again, hopefully soon. Either here in Toronto or out in Portland where you are.
Yeah, please.
So, Ned, as I had mentioned, you must have put in an awful lot of research into the production of this film. But before we get into that, tell me a little bit about how this story crossed your path.
Yeah, it's a great story. I'm a member of a motorcycle club here in Portland called the Flying 15. That was established in 1934, and then it kind of fell into, I don't know, kind of abandoned in the 50s after the war. And then in the 1990s, it was reconstituted. And one of the key people that reconstituted the club was a gentleman by the name of Peter Fritsch, who the film is dedicated to. Peter was our club historian. And in the 1990s, he started the research project on Ray Tauscher. He knew Ray's ex-wife, and had done a number of research efforts and had copied articles and from newspapers and some of the pictures that were still extant from Ray's career as a racer in the 1930s. Unfortunately, my wife and I, who were friends with his widow, helped her clean out his belongings. He had a bunch of guns and knives, and I helped generate an auction where we sold those to club members. And Michelle walked away with a banker's box full of Peter's research on Ray Tauscher, unbeknownst to me that she had done that. When the pandemic happened and we were isolating in March of 2020, my wife, Michelle, brought this banker's box out in front of me and set it down and opened it up and said, "Here, take a look at this material." We had some of the copies of it. And this kind of caught my attention that, here's a guy from Portland, Oregon. He was born here, raised here, went to high school, and his career disappeared. And so I found this very fascinating, and I've used Ancestry.com to research my own family, and I built a family tree for Ray Tauscher. And it turns out there's a lot of material out there about Ray Tauscher and his siblings, his family, and as a result of my building this family tree, I located in the Portland area 2 surviving family members. They were step-grandchildren and step-great-grandchildren who knew Ray. Apparently, Ray's entire bloodline family that he was born into, his sisters and brothers and parents, predeceased him. So he was a sole survivor from that line, but he married into another family. And I found those relatives, and thank goodness, Doug Stone, his step-grandson, kept the original materials in a banker's box, not sure what he's going to do with it. And so I tracked them down, and they invited me to their house. And Doug brought out all this material. There was original scrapbooks. There was race jerseys. There were pinbacks from his time riding in the AMA gypsy rides, and so on. So I had all of this original material. And from that, I was able to expand the timeline of Ray's life and get kind of a real detailed take on his career. And then I started going on the web looking for any pictures or surviving video of Ray. And I found some video that was at an archive of Ray racing in Paris, France in 1931, the year that he won 4 world championships. And so I was able to acquire that footage. And then I acquired some more footage. Don't know if Ray's in it or not, but it was period footage from Pathé. They extracted quite a sum of money for that footage and licensing rights to put into festivals.
Mm-hmm.
But from that material, his scrapbooks and the footage, as well as interviews with his surviving family members that are in the film, we put together the documentary.
Amazing. Did you go into this thinking that you're gonna like to tell the story via a documentary, or were you just interested in the story and that's what made you pursue the research?
Well, it was one thing led to another. I mean, Michelle gave me this box of materials, and I started looking at it and said, wow, here's something from Portland. Let me read about it, because, pandemic, you're looking for things to do as you're cooped up in your house. And after I got into it, I said, this is a great story that needs to be brought back and be told.
Yeah.
And my initial approach was to kind of do a voice of God documentary. Someone saying, and Ray Tauscher was born in Portland, and he raced here, and he won this and won that. And I don't know if it was a stroke of brilliance or a brain cramp. I said, why don't we do this in first person, as if Ray is telling his life story? And that's how we did it. And it worked out pretty good. I have a friend who's done other work for me as a professional voice actor. And we commissioned him to do the voice of Ray Tauscher.
Are you reading my notes over here? Because literally over here, I said, why did you choose to tell the story through Ray's voice? That's one of the things that I really liked about it. Like, yeah. It wasn't your traditional documentary, with a voiceover narration. It was told through Ray's voice.
Right.
And even that I thought was like well done. It wasn't over the top or cheesy as it can be sometimes. Like, yeah. It came across in a very genuine and sometimes humble way, which I think resonated with the research that you've done from Ray, because his great-grandchildren were saying that he talked about his racing exploits, but he didn't like boast about it or go right. on. So
yeah, that was one of the things when we had Richard do Ray's voice. We had talked to the grandchildren, and they said he was not boastful. He was very humble, and he hardly ever talked about his racing exploits. Mm-hmm. So the kind of persona that was presented to us was a humble man that had his moment in the sun, his 5 years of racing internationally. And then he moved on. I mean, as we say in the documentary, he was a postal inspector for 38 years, and worked as a line supervisor at Portland Meadows, which is a horse racing track, which has since closed down, because he grew up with horses. And so we worked with Richard, who was the voice of Ray, and basically said, this isn't a boastful person, and this is someone who's modest. And Richard's a real professional. Like I said, he's done work for me. He does local work for TV stations and advertising. He's a real professional. So that really made it work.
Yeah. I wonder like how he got into that headspace to speak, have Ray speak through him in a way.
We had a couple of, sessions where we talked to him and went over the script and talked about tone and intent and and what Ray talked about. And again, I mean, this is a professional voice artist. I mean, he charged money for this, and that's why I have a professional voice artist versus me trying to be Ray.
No, it was great. Like I said, it's one of the things that made it so very enjoyable to watch, and not your typical, documentary, especially like documentaries where there's a lot of archival footage. They're traditionally, displayed in a different way with a narration and so on. It can get a little bit dry. So this I thought was quite good, and it made it enjoyable to watch. The footage that you've got from the racing that you found, it was striking, actually. It was amazing to see, amazing to think of what was happening 100 years ago.
Yep.
And when you see some of that footage from Wembley, for example, which is a massive stadium,
right?
It is packed with people, like
there's
shoulder to shoulder.
80,000 is what they had when it was packed to the max.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, before you had the masses watching soccer tournaments like we have today in Europe, motorcycle racing pulled them in just the same way. And it never caught on in America like that. I think that's one of the stark contrasts for me, is that, the Hollywood representing, the Wild Bunch and Hell's Angels and all of those kind of, cultural touch points, I think really kind of have, put the motorcycle community in a different category than you'd find for like, NFL or MLB or something like that. And, in Europe, though, we just got back from riding in Germany, and there are a lot of motorcyclists in Germany, and they're very well integrated into the motor culture over there. We were riding on the Autobahn, and there were some construction delays, and the cars separated so that we could split lanes. I mean, they moved out of the way for the motorcyclists to come through. Here it's like, you motorcyclists, we're going to get you. We're going to pull over and open our door. I mean,
I don't know important, but here in Toronto, they'll intentionally wait for you to come by and then like.
Well, I just spent 4 years working with some other colleagues here in town trying to get motorcycle lane sharing approved by the legislature. And we got the House and the Senate to both sign off on a 3-1 majority on our like 5th try to get it through. And then the governor vetoed it. So she's not on my list of favorite.
Anyway, people. Yeah. Going back to that footage, can you imagine having 80,000 people attend a local flat track race? It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it is amazing.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And watching some of that footage, Ray racing on those dirt tracks with those skinny tires. I mean, it looked like he was on the back of a bucking bronco sometimes. Seriously. And they're going full speed. They're not going slow.
Yeah.
It's crazy to think. I mean, the amount of the safety gear that was at the time was not with what we have now, the helmets for sure. Yeah. Do you think that racers from that era were a different breed than today's racers?
They'd have to be. I mean, but it was what it was. It was what they had, is my take. But there's one quote that we lifted that Ray made in the local newspaper that's about 2/3 of the way into the film, where he talks about, it takes more than nerve to go down the track with the throttle wide open. You got to have the feel for the motorcycle. And if you can't do that, stay off the track. I mean, there's that kind of summarized the quote. But that was lifted directly from an interview with Ray in a local newspaper. And I think that, back in that day, they knew what they were up against. And Ray, of course, he had a couple of major injuries that eventually knocked him out. And he wasn't the only one. I mean, a lot of people were injured. The track conditions were not always smooth like today's speedway racing is. Those tracks and are the flat track racers. I mean, they spend a lot of time grooming the track. And back then it was like, well, they had the horse races yesterday. I guess we'll just let the bikes go out there. So.
Yeah. And how long did the research process take from the time that you got this initial box from the Flying 15 archivist to the additional research that you did, building the tree and ancestry, gathering the film footage, archival film footage, and so on?
It was about a year.
Wow.
Again, I started in March of 2020, and I think we premiered it. I have to go look, 2021 early, I think. I have to go look at the website. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's about a year. And once I found the grandchildren and got their material, that was like 3 months after I started. We had all this content. And then, thank goodness, my youngest son, Michael, who at the time was a on-air news reporter for a TV station down in Eugene, he would come up and visit us and see what I was doing. And he said, well, let's try this. What do you think about this? And he's great at giving me feedback, as all young children are. And pretty soon I said, look, if you want to get involved, commit. And he committed. And he came up and he added a lot of value. For example, the story kind of bookends with the scrapbook opening and the scrapbook closing. That was his idea. And he shot those just on our dining room table, with a camera on a tripod. And the idea of having, Ray's racing jersey and the articles and the pictures, kind of bookend the story. That was his idea.
Yeah, great.
We worked together on the script for probably 6 weeks before we, really got down to getting into production. So there was all this research for like 3 months, and then there was like 6 weeks of script revisions, and then the decision was made to do it first person. And then once we had the script in place, we had Richard do the narration, and then it was just a matter of editing and bringing all the images in. Because when we wrote the script, we had one side of the document had, here are the words, and the other side was what images we're going to use, which came from the research. So it came together pretty quick once we had the script approved.
Is this the first time that you worked on a project with your son?
He actually did some work early on the Thanhouser film documentary, my first one back in 1914. He just gave suggestions, but in terms of actually doing a project with him, that's the first one.
Okay. So you mentioned the Thanhouser Studios or Thanhouser Company Film Preservation Company.
Right.
For those people that don't know, Ned's grandfather started a film studio back in 1909, if I remember correctly.
1909.
1909 through 1917, and
Correct.
over the course of that time produced over 1,000 films.
Right.
Can you imagine that? And now Ned, for the last, I don't know how many years, has been on a mission to find and collect all of those films and preserve them, so that they're not lost, which is amazing. What an amazing history from your grandfather. And it seems like the work that you're doing now, trying to keep Ray's story alive, is like in perfect alignment with that.
Yeah. I spent over 35 years researching my grandfather's and my grandmother. They were co-founders of the studio.
Pioneers of American cinema. I mean, think early 1900s. Incredible. Yeah,
the first motion pictures that were screened for money were 1896. Edison did that. And the industry kind of took off in the early 1900s. And my grandfather and grandmother had been in live theater in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And they were putting on, a show a night. And they changed their show every week. And so they had this bookshelf full of, screen-ready scripts. And they were very educated on, different stories, classics primarily, Dickens and Shakespeare. And they saw the writing on the silver screen, so to speak, that the industry was changing. And so Edwin went to New York in 1909 and investigated the motion picture industry, saying that's kind of where the future is. and made a commitment and founded the studio in New York. Moved the family out in 1909, and the rest is history.
Amazing. That's a credible story. Ned, once you finished putting together the documentary, I'm assuming that you showed it to Ray Tauscher's family.
I did.
And so what was that like?
They were amazed that, they had known about, because they'd known Ray personally.
Mm-hmm.
He died in 1981, so I never met him. They had known him and known what a athlete he was, and what a humble man he was. And when they saw the history brought to life, if you will, with Ray telling his story, they were pretty emotional about it.
Yeah.
And appreciative of it as well. I mean, for them also to trust me to tell Ray's story, I think was really gratifying to me. I remember my second meeting with Doug Stone, who had the box of materials. I said, "Can I borrow that?" And he was sort of like, "I don't know." And his sister said, "Oh, let him have it." And I think they were glad that they made that decision.
Yes. So you had mentioned the word trust there. I could imagine that must have been difficult for them.
Yeah.
Knowing that they're going to not only hand over this material, but then this other person, someone that they don't know, I'm assuming.
Right.
I'm assuming you guys didn't have a relationship at that time.
We had no relationship. But,
yeah. So that's kind of hard because you're entrusting your family's legacy to somebody else.
Yeah. And that was like, I had spoken to them on the phone, and I'd gone out and met them once before. And then they invited me back, and we had this long discussion about how I would approach the project. And it's just like, when part of my career was at Intel Corporation, and I was in corporate sales, if you will. We'd sell product to Dell or NEC over in Japan. I spent a lot of time in Japan. And, one of the first things you do in any sales relationship is relationship establishing and establishing your trust.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to do that, number one. And then you can go into discovery or understanding what their needs are. So one of the other things I had to do was understand, how did they want to have Ray's life represented? Were they, and they told me he's not boastful, he's humble. And I tried to represent that in the film. And then you go into, can I have that? Can I have all that material? I'll bring it back to you. And there's some great material in there. There was one of these posters from France. I mean, it's a big poster. I mean, it's like 40 by 30 sheet, and it's kind of glued in. Ray saved everything. He had a clipping service where he clipped all the, had people clip any article had his name in it out of the newspapers over in Europe, mostly international press. But there's this beautiful poster, and so I went out and got that framed. And gave it to Doug, and he really appreciated me. It's a big thing, but a couple $100, I think really showed them my commitment to representing Ray, and they appreciated that.
That's a nice gift. Very good, beautiful gesture. I'm sure they enjoyed it. Yeah, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall to see their reaction when they saw the film. I'm glad they had that moment. So that's really nice.
Yeah, they did.
So moving on to the next thing was one of the things that kind of before I get to this, I have one more question about the family. Did they have any input in the film, providing any sort of creative direction? Did they ask you to change anything?
Nope, nothing. I think, again, they knew Ray as step grandfather. Mm-hmm. They told me stories about he liked to go hunting, and he was an athlete. He had always was, very athletic, even in his older years. But they never said, when I gave them some of the rough cuts to look at, they seemed a little bit detached, like, whatever you do is okay. I never got, we ought to take this out or put this in, or you forgot to mention. I never got any feedback like that. They were very supportive of what I did.
Okay, that must have made it easier for sure.
It
That's
did.
great.
Yeah, there's no tension, which I think is really makes it easier on the filmmaker.
Yeah. Okay. So then the one thing that in the movie sort of bothered me, I guess, if that's appropriate to say, is that you mentioned that no motorcyclists, and not even Ray, obviously including Ray, have been recognized by the Oregon Sports Hall of Fame. So that's kind of bothersome.
Yeah.
Given that he won 7, if I remember correctly, championships.
Yeah.
I mean,
You would think.
what more does one need to do? Why has he not been recognized, or anyone else for that matter?
Yeah. Well,
What do you think?
I'll give you a little history on this. This gentleman that started this project, Peter Fritsch, in 1997, submitted an application to the Oregon Sports Hall of Fame for Ray Tauscher based on his research. And Peter had put together a rough timeline and some of the achievements in Ray's career and submitted it in 1997. And it was not taken, wasn't recognized. And so I said, well, this is a tragedy. I should do that again. So I wrote a long letter and resubmitted Ray for consideration by the Oregon Sports Hall of Fame before the documentary was done to meet their deadline for when they have their decision meeting. And said, this has been submitted in 1997. It's 2020 or 2019 when I did. It's 2020 when I put it in. And they have a board, and the members of the organization vote, and Ray didn't make the cut. Now there's a lot of categories: tennis and badminton and fencing, and pick your sport. Oregon sports teams and coaches and stuff all get recognized. They have a category called auto sports, and so I've nominated him in auto sports. And there are 3 people in the auto sports category: Herschel McGriff, if you know who he is, probably not.
I don't know.
He's a NASCAR racer. Monty Shelton, who is a local car dealer who won 7 championships at the Portland Rose Cup. And there's a third one. I can't remember who it is, but nothing national, nothing international.
Right.
Local heroes. And I sent in all of this front page news from the local news from the Portland Oregonian newspaper from 1930s, and Ray's achievements and his all the stuff that was basically going to be included in there, and it was passed over. So very frustrating on my end.
Yeah. What about the film? Have you sent the film over?
I've sent them the film. Yeah. And nothing. It's crickets.
That's puzzling to me.
It is puzzling.
Okay. What about the AMA?
I sent it to the AMA Foundation, where they have their heritage. Nothing. Crickets also there.
Okay.
I don't understand,
Yeah. Now, Portland has a very tight-knit motorcycle community and a racing community.
Right.
And I've had the pleasure to come out and visit you and the folks at the Portland Motorcycle Film Festival back in 2018. So I know how passionate that audience was. And there's actually a lot of motorcycle films that are being produced out of Oregon.
Right.
So the community is there. Can't they grab signs and march Capitol Hill? And it's puzzling. I imagine it's frustrating especially after all that work and I don't know what else they would be looking for.
I'm baffled. I really am. I don't understand. Here's an international world champion who in 1931, had his year.
Right.
And it's just overlooked. I don't know what to say. And I've moved on. I'm working on a couple other projects now, but I don't know what to think about it. We're kind of in the long tail of this thing. We've got the film. The Ray Tauscher was just accepted as a semifinalist at the Serbian Film Festival, International Film Festival
Okay.
over in Serbia. I mean, so still getting people to look at it. But one of the things that I think kind of talks about some cultural bias against motorcycling is that I've submitted it to a number of festivals, including those here in Portland, Oregon. There's the Portland International Film Festival and the Portland Film Festival that are, and there's one in Bend, which is a big film festival, very widely recognized as one of the best ones.
I'm familiar with it.
None of them have taken it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and regardless of the fact that it's a motorcycle film festival film, it's a film about a person who achieved great things.
Exactly.
And there's a trajectory of this person that I think is really engaging, and his accomplishments shouldn't be forgotten. But the only festivals, other than a couple of them, like the Serbian one that just showed up yesterday, Rome has taken it in their motorcycle film festival, the Rome Moto Technica, the French Riviera Film Festival, they've taken it. You're taking it. And I haven't heard whether or not Tom Parker and Chris Page are going to take it. I'm assuming they will. I'm crossing my fingers. They haven't announced, they're still waiting for theaters to open up. They're going to do a live only thing.
Yeah.
But it feels like motorcycle themed film festivals embrace this. Ones that are not motorcycle film festivals, if they see the word motorcycle, they'll say, we don't want to hear about it. When I did
there is some stigma associated with it. You're right, for sure. And I mean, I enjoyed it because, I'm not from Portland, I'm not from Oregon, but it's a story of our community. Like we all, as motorcyclists, we all, I think, belong in the same communities, and it's a story of our history. And beyond the fact that it was well done, I think it's an important piece that needs to be shared and maintained. It's just a compelling story as films that have been made about Bonneville's flat track racing. With right now the gentleman's name escapes me, that was lying prone across the bike, across the flats. But anyway, I'm glad at least that you were able to preserve Ray's history, and I'm sure that it will continue on.
I hope so.
What are you working on next, Ned?
Well, I got two projects that are currently going on. In my motorcycle club, we're a real tight-knit community, one of our members, who was my sponsor to join the club, you have to have a sponsor, passed away this year at a very young age, in mid-40s.
Wow.
And not from a motorcycle accident, but for health reasons. And he was a friend of ours, and his widow is a friend of ours. And when he was a young teen, he was traveling the country, hopping on freight trains and having adventures, if you will, across the country. And just a second. One of the things he did, he wrote down everything. And before, this is 1990s, right? So he wrote a zine. If you remember from the 90s, zines were big deals, right?
Yeah.
Everybody would, write their stories, and they publish them, self-publish in magazines, right? That they call their zines. So Matt, this friend of ours, who was my sponsor, after he passed away, there was a memorial service, and they handed out this compilation that people had saved of Matt's life. And I read through it, and one of the stories in there really stood out to me as kind of indicative of his life. And I said, dude, rather than just having words on paper, why don't we bring this story to life? And have you heard of an animator by the name of Bill Plimpton?
Yes, of course.
Well, I knew Bill from some other conference work that my wife had done, and we met him and had talked with him. I sent him a script that I wrote with Matt's words from this limousine, from his zine. and some ideas of some imagery and said, would you be interested in drawing these images and bringing it to life? And he said, okay. And he said he'd love to do it. So one of the projects I'm working on, which is we're just about to do a Kickstarter campaign to pay for it because Bill Plimpton wants money. He's an artist and he needs money, so he's not starving. So he did, 24 frames of images that kind of leapt from the page, so that that will be animated with a voiceover reading Matt's words. So it'll be kind of an animation project with Bill Plimpton as the artist and one of his childhood friends in our club, another club member who grew up with Matt in Little Rock, reading his words.
That's really cool.
Yeah, so that's
a great idea.
Yeah. And the other project is, I mentioned back to the Thanhouser company. A couple of years ago, I did a project with some people from Norway, the Norwegian, the National Library of Norway. And they had a couple of films and they did some voiceover commentary on the films. There were films done by Thanhouser, they were based on a story by Henrik Ibsen. So Ibsen is, a famous dramatist. And they contacted me early this year and said, hey, we found another Thanhouser film in our archives. They found a 5-reel, about an hour long, Thanhouser film from 1916 that was considered lost. And so they've restored the film. They did a high resolution 4.5K scan of the film. It's tinted, it's beautiful, and it's an interesting story about a fisherman who throws his net out in the waters and brings in a young girl who is stranded on a ship's spar. And she has a curse on her. That's the storyline. So, but that'll be coming out later on. I've got the film pretty much edited down, and I'm waiting for a commentary track by a film professor at University of Texas, and then I got music from a guy being done in Germany to accompany it. So, you got to bring all these. I'm a producer in that capability. But those are the projects that are currently ongoing.
Both sound great.
Yeah,
very different. Yeah, very different. Cool.
I don't have any motorcycle films right now. Yeah, I mean, other than I just did this little thing on Germany that was a cheap hack from our trip.
I'm sure the creativity bolt may strike you with a motorcycle film again.
We'll find something.
But right now, these other projects sound pretty cool. I really like the idea of the zine one and animating that. That sounds neat.
I'll send you a link to a preview.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Good for you.
Okay.
When it comes out, the rest of the world can see it.
Fantastic. Well, Ned, thank you again so much for sharing Ray's story with us and for joining me on this chat. It was great to get some of that background scoop of how it all came together. It was interesting. And,
well, I'll tell you, my compliment to you and your organization is the best gift that you can give to a filmmaker is an audience, and you've done that. So I thank you for that.
No, thank you. That's really kind of you to say. Looking forward to seeing you again and Michelle in person, hopefully soon.
Yeah, I hope so. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Be well and stay safe.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.